The worst news, football-wise, in recent hours doesn't concern the game itself, because in the end, the ball keeps rolling. Yesterday, I shared my thoughts, my assessments on the Juventus and Napoli matches, and here I'll add another contribution. But yesterday, we learned, we understood, we took in that if, and let's put an if in front, if we were to go to the World Cup, getting through the playoffs by beating Ireland first, and then either Wales or Bosnia, everything you know, we would be in the fourth pot for the draw, and for future hypothetical futuristic situations, we would be in the fourth pot. Basically, they've relegated us to the very bottom of the pile, actually even lower than the bottom, alongside nations that, out of respect, I won't even name. But this shows you the absolute decline of Italian football, thanks to the leadership of the Federation President, Gabriele Gravina. We have never in our history ended up in the fourth pot. So should we hope to get there? Let's hope we get there. But we would end up in the groups with teams that, in football terms, matter minus 25, minus 250, minus 100,000, and we're in the fourth pot. Thank you. I'll dedicate another video to this unbelievable situation, but for now, I'd like to go back to two topics, actually to related topics that refer to last night's match. Because you know how we are, especially in Italy. When something doesn't work, they publish and fill entire pages about it. Look at how much Jonathan David cost. Look at how much Openda cost, their bad signings. After 2 or 3 months, they've written everyone off without any real reasons, and especially often without reading into or understanding the situation that led to something like this. Then all it takes is a goal, and how does it work in Italy? The result-oriented people come back onto the scene after having spread poison and passed all kinds of judgments, but now, finally, they've found themselves again. Now a new cycle can begin. They've broken the deadlock. But what does that even mean? What is the standard they're bringing? So if he scores a brace against Cagliari, does that mean Openda is considered the best striker to arrive in Italy in the last transfer window? There needs to be at least a bit of balance. First of all, from my point of view, we need to understand that football isn't some kind of improvisation where you set up 10 cans and move them around with a remote control. Football is about strategy, trust, organization, and many other things that, in the case of Openda and Jonathan David, simply weren't there. In fact, I'll go even further. From my point of view, Openda and David should be asking for damages for all the situations they've had to endure, for all the situations they've had to put up with since they arrived. By the way, yesterday Openda was self-critical without going into detail. He talked about having a hard time settling in. But have you ever wondered why, both in Jonathan David's and Openda's cases, it was so difficult for them to adapt? But they did arrive. Jonathan David was both wanted and not wanted by the former coach who, in quotes, was drooling over keeping Colombo Ani. Nothing against that, but in football, it's not like you can just ask for something and automatically get what you want. Coming off seasons where he always scored double digits, and it's not like, with all due respect, he was playing in some no-name league. He played in important leagues. Now, don't try to tell me that League One is some backwater league. If you score against Marseille, against Lyon, against Paris, Saint-Germain, or whoever you want, you're an important player. In fact, there were some very enthusiastic welcoming committees for Jonathan David's arrival. Then what happens? What happens is that at the end of the transfer window, Openda arrives, and Tudor, who had other ideas, manages David and Openda in a way you really shouldn't handle a player who's just been signed, probably because he's disappointed and all that. From what I hear, Openda wasn't someone he would have fully approved. He just put up with him, endured him, and then this whole back and forth, this dance, this incredible in and out situation began. But just look and check the minutes played and the use of Openda and David under the previous management. Sometimes Openda played as a center forward, sometimes as a second striker, sometimes next to Vlahovic, with Vlahovic, without Vlahovic, behind Vlahovic. The same goes for Jonathan David, sometimes next to Vlahovic. It was a total mess, absolute chaos, to the point that, from my perspective, both of them should be asking for damages. I'm asking you for damages, morally, technically. I'm asking for damages because you've done things to me that honestly have literally damaged me. Now put yourself in the shoes of a young person who's 20, 21, 22, 23, 25, 26 years old, whatever age you want. They're all young people who are suddenly taken as essential references and priorities and are tossed from one side to the other without any kind of criteria and with a way of doing things and acting that, honestly, calling it questionable is an understatement. And so they've gotten lost. Yesterday, Openda talked about settling in, but they've thrown him into the blender. And when you score, it's why did you score? No, but when you play, how much you play, why you play, how they put you in the right conditions. Only in Italy, I've read things that are just social media stuff, with all due respect. This Juventus squad is weaker than the squads of recent years, of the last 10 years. These things honestly belong to a way of judging freely just to change your mind later. And you'll see that in the case of Openda and David, they'll definitely change their minds if they score 2 or 3 goals in the next 3 or 4 matches. And you can't think like that. We're talking about two excellent strikers. A few weeks ago, I provoked, so to speak, by saying that if Gasperini had Openda and Jonathan David in his squad, Roma would be flying. Then again, Roma is flying anyway thanks to the skill of their coach, but these are two strong players who here have been made to look like flops by others. They are considered useless by those who have a very limited view of football and by those who judge based on a result without understanding. The adaptation, if it happened, how it happened, the appreciation, the approval, the management by the previous coach. Spalletti found himself having to deal with things that had been compromised by the previous coach's management. What Tudor did in the whirlwind was something incredible in the way he completely wiped out some major market investments. I'm amazed to hear people who should know football because they've been around it for 10 or 15 years talk about David as if he's no good, as if he's a striker. But say it beforehand, you should say it. Also because it was even said that David would never wear the Juventus shirt. That was wrong information. David had already decided back in April to wear the Juventus shirt. But if you think that about David, you need to tell me on July 2nd, July 3rd, July 4th, or August 2nd. But not after 7 or 8 matches, judging based on performances that were affected by the previous coach's roller coaster decisions, which threw everyone into the blender, everyone into a short circuit. Now Spalletti is trying to recover two strong players. The goals yesterday weren't the kind of goals Van Basten or Ibrahimovic used to score in the good old days, but they were two important goals that, in my opinion, unlock two strikers who have never been on the sidelines, never the wrong cards, never irrelevant situations. Just look at how much they cost, especially Openda, but also the salary that was given to David. They had even started making moves to put David on the market in January. All very imaginative interpretations, but the point is that those two, Openda and David, should be compensated in some way for how they were tossed around in the first 2 or 3 months of the season. Their performance clearly suffered as a result in a negative way. You end up performing poorly when you're being tossed from one side to the other. And so without understanding the key factor that led to this decline in performance, a verdict had already been passed. I believe that if they were to ask for moral compensation for such an absurd use, both of them would have a very good chance of winning it. Jokes aside, I think that now the so-called former losers, as they've been labeled, will have one more opportunity to prove that they belong at Juve. Rest assured about one thing, even if they don't prove it, it wouldn't be their fault because what they've done in the past is beyond question. The blame would eventually fall on those who didn't put them in a position to make an impact. Form your own opinion on this topic, which is quite delicate, and I wish you all the best going forward.